3 weeks after the press conference, Sarah's life had settled into a new rhythm that was both familiar and completely different. The diner still served the same coffee and homemade pies, but now it attracted a much more diverse clientele. Bikers from across the region made regular stops, treating the place like a pilgrimage site. They were always respectful, often bringing gifts for Sarah and telling stories about Marcus, who had become something of a folk hero in their community. Marcus himself had visited twice since his release, both times bringing his elderly mother to meet the woman who had stood up for him. Mrs. Thompson was a tiny, dignified lady who had raised Marcus alone after his father died in Vietnam. She hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "Thank you for seeing my boy's heart instead of just his appearance." The media attention had gradually faded, but not before Sarah received interview requests from national television shows and magazine writers. She had turned down most of them, preferring to let her actions speak rather than seeking fame. However, she did agree to one magazine interview about prejudice and the importance of judging people by their character rather than their appearance. The financial impact on the diner had been unexpected and positive. Business had tripled, with people driving from distant towns to eat at the place where the lady stood up to the police. Sarah had been able to pay off her debts and even hire 2 part-time employees to help with the increased traffic. More importantly, the relationship she had formed with the motorcycle community had enriched her life in ways she never anticipated. Jake stopped by every few weeks, usually bringing news about Marcus or updates on other legal cases involving bikers' rights. Charles had become a regular customer, often bringing other veterans who appreciated the welcoming atmosphere Sarah maintained. "You know," Charles told her during one visit, "what you did here changed how a lot of people see us." That press conference was on every major news network. For once, we were shown as human beings instead of just stereotypes. Sarah had also developed an unlikely friendship with Patricia Reynolds, Marcus's lawyer. Patricia had been fighting discrimination against bikers for decades and was amazed by how Sarah's simple act of conscience had brought national attention to issues of police misconduct and profiling. "Your case is being cited in courtrooms across the country," Patricia told Sarah during a recent visit. "Lawyers are using your video and testimony to challenge similar arrests. You've created legal precedent without even trying." The local community's reaction had been mixed but generally positive. Sheriff Williams had privately thanked Sarah for handling the situation peacefully, noting that it could have escalated into something dangerous if not for the discipline shown by the motorcycle clubs. Some residents initially feared that the diner would become a biker hangout, but they quickly realized that the increased business was helping the entire TOWN. Mrs. Patterson had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, often telling anyone who would listen about her neighbor's courage. "Sarah did what any decent person should do," she would say. "She stood up for what was right." However, not everyone approved of Sarah's actions. A few anonymous phone calls and letters criticized her for supporting criminals and encouraging lawlessness. Sarah found these responses sad rather than threatening, recognizing them as examples of the prejudice that had led to Marcus's false arrest in the first place. The most meaningful change in Sarah's life was the sense of purpose she had discovered. For years after her husband's death, she had simply been going through the motions of running the diner. Now she felt connected to something larger, a community of people who valued loyalty, justice, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Marcus had found stable employment with a construction company whose owner was impressed by the character references from the charity organization. He had also begun speaking at community events about his experience with the justice system and the importance of not judging people based on appearance. Sarah saved more than just me that day, Marcus told a group of high school students during one presentation. "She saved my faith in people doing the right thing even when it's difficult." The legal fallout from the case had been significant but quiet. The officers involved in Marcus's arrest had received disciplinary action, and the police department had implemented new training on proper arrest procedures and community relations. No one was fired, but the incident had clearly sent a message about accountability. 6 months after that fateful morning, Sarah received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a teenage girl in California whose father was a biker and had been arrested under similar circumstances. The girl had seen Sarah's story on the news and had spoken up when she witnessed her father being mistreated during his arrest. The charges against him were later dropped when video evidence contradicted the police report. "You showed me that one person can make a difference," the girl wrote. "Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up for my dad." Sarah kept that letter in the cash register drawer next to the stack of bills that were now much easier to pay. It reminded her daily that her decision to speak up had rippled out in ways she never could have imagined. On quiet mornings, when the breakfast rush was over and the diner was peaceful, Sarah would sometimes think about that day and wonder what would have happened if she had remained silent. Marcus might have spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The truth about police misconduct might never have come to light, and she would have missed the opportunity to become part of a community that valued courage and loyalty above all else. The bell above the door chimed, interrupting her thoughts. A young man in a business suit walked in, followed by an older woman wearing a leather vest with Hell's Angels patches. They sat down together at the counter, and Sarah smiled as she poured their coffee, marveling at how her small diner had become a place where all kinds of people felt welcome. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Coffee to start?" As she served her customers, Sarah reflected on the lesson that had changed her life. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking a stand, even when you're afraid. And sometimes, when you find the courage to stand up for a stranger, you discover a family you never knew you needed. The press conference took place on the small patch of grass in front of Sarah's diner, with news crews from major networks positioned in a semicircle. Behind the reporters, nearly 200 bikers stood in organized rows, their leather vests and patches creating an imposing but peaceful backdrop. Sarah had never seen so many cameras and microphones in one place. Patricia Reynolds, Marcus's lawyer, stepped forward first. She was a confident woman in her 50s who commanded immediate attention despite being surrounded by much larger men in leather jackets. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, "we're here today because an innocent man is sitting in jail, arrested for a crime he could not possibly have committed. Marcus Thompson was arrested this morning based on a witness description that could apply to thousands of motorcycle riders across the country." She held up a folder thick with documents and photographs. "At the exact time the armed robbery was taking place 200 miles from here, Marcus Thompson was participating in a charity ride for children's cancer research. We have video footage, photographs, and signed statements from dozens of witnesses, including police officers who were providing security for the event." The reporters began asking questions immediately, but Patricia continued with her presentation. She displayed enlarged photographs showing Marcus at the charity event with timestamps clearly visible. The evidence was overwhelming and methodically presented. Furthermore, Patricia continued, the arrest itself was conducted in a manner that violated Mr. Thompson's civil rights. The officers used excessive force against a cooperative suspect, ignored his attempts to provide alibi information, and dismissed the concerns of a witness who observed their misconduct. This was Sarah's cue. Her legs felt unsteady as she approached the microphones, but Lisa stood close by for support, and she could feel the encouraging presence of the bikers behind her. "My name is Sarah Martinez, and I own this diner," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "This morning, a man came into my restaurant and ordered breakfast. He was polite, respectful, and caused no trouble whatsoever." Sarah looked directly into the cameras, thinking of Marcus sitting in jail for something he didn't do. "When the police arrived to arrest him, I witnessed unnecessary roughness against a man who was completely cooperative. When I spoke up about the treatment I was seeing, the officers told me to mind my own business and demanded that I stop recording." She held up her phone. "I recorded the arrest because I believed what I was seeing wasn't right. No one, regardless of their appearance or background, deserves to be treated roughly when they're not resisting or causing problems." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Martinez, did you know this man was a Hell's Angel when you defended him?" "I knew he was wearing a motorcycle club vest," Sarah replied. "But that didn't matter to me. What mattered was that he was being treated unfairly in my establishment." Another reporter asked, "Are you concerned about your safety with so many bikers here?" Sarah looked back at the crowd of leather-clad men and women who had traveled hundreds of miles to support her and Marcus. "These people have shown me nothing but respect and courtesy. They've been more polite than some of my regular customers." Jake stepped forward to address the media. "We're here because one of our brothers was falsely arrested, and because this woman had the courage to speak up when she saw injustice. We're not here to cause trouble or intimidate anyone. We're here to demand that the truth be heard." The questions came rapidly after that. Reporters wanted to know about the Hells Angels organization, about Marcus's background, and about Sarah's decision to get involved. Patricia and Jake fielded most of the questions professionally, while Sarah answered the ones directed specifically at her. "What do you want to see happen next?" a television reporter asked Sarah. "I want to see Marcus released immediately and the charges dropped," Sarah replied. "And I want to see some accountability for how he was treated during his arrest." As the press conference continued, Sarah noticed more local residents gathering at the edges of the crowd. Some looked nervous about the large gathering of bikers, but others seemed curious and even supportive. A few of her regular customers had shown up and were nodding approvingly at her statements. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, had driven over and was standing near the back of the crowd. When Sarah caught her eye, the older woman gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "Good for you." The most dramatic moment came when Patricia announced new information that had just been received. "We've learned that the actual perpetrators of the armed robbery have been arrested in a neighboring state. They were caught attempting another robbery this morning, and they've confessed to the crime Marcus Thompson was accused of." The crowd of bikers erupted in cheers, and several reporters immediately began making phone calls to verify this breaking news. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing that Marcus would soon be free. "This proves what we've been saying all along," Patricia continued. "Marcus Thompson is innocent, and his arrest was based on inadequate police work and racial profiling against motorcycle riders." Jake addressed the media one final time. "We want to thank Sarah Martinez for having the courage to stand up for what was right. Her actions today represent the best of what America should be, people looking out for each other regardless of their differences." As the press conference concluded, Sarah was approached by several reporters who wanted individual interviews. She agreed to speak with a few of them, with Lisa's guidance. But she was careful to stick to the facts of what she had witnessed. The crowd of bikers began to disperse gradually, but not before each group stopped by to shake Sarah's hand and thank her personally. Many left business cards and contact information, telling her to call if she ever needed anything. "You're part of our family now," Charles told her. "That's not something we say lightly." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from friends, family members, and even strangers who had seen the news coverage. Most were supportive, though a few callers expressed concern about her association with the motorcycle club. By evening, word came that Marcus had been released from jail and all charges had been dropped. The real perpetrator's confession had made his case impossible to prosecute, and the district attorney's office was quietly hoping the story would fade from the headlines. Sarah stood in her diner that evening, looking around at the space that had been transformed by the day's events. Tomorrow it would go back to serving coffee and breakfast to truckers and travelers, but something fundamental had changed. She had taken a stand for justice and found herself embraced by a community she never knew existed. The last group of bikers prepared to leave, but Jake lingered behind to speak with Sarah privately. "This isn't over," he told her. "The media attention is going to continue for a while, and there might be some pushback from people who don't understand what happened here today." Sarah nodded. "I know, but I'd do it again." Jake smiled. "I believe you would. That's why you're family now?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the pen, staring at the blank piece of paper. Outside, the crowd of reporters had grown larger, and she could hear the distant sound of more motorcycles approaching. Jake stood beside her, patient but alert, while Charles and several other senior bikers maintained a respectful distance. "Take your time," Jake said softly. "Just write what you saw and what you felt was right or wrong about how it happened." Sarah began writing, her thoughts flowing more clearly than she had expected. She wrote about Marcus's polite behavior, his gentle demeanor, and the unnecessary roughness she had witnessed during his arrest. She described how the officers had dismissed her concerns, and how she felt compelled to record the incident for fairness. As she wrote, more bikers continued to arrive. Sarah could hear Jake coordinating with the new arrivals, ensuring everyone understood this was a peaceful gathering. The organization and discipline impressed her. There was no drinking, no loud music, no aggressive behavior that might justify police intervention. "How many people are out there now?" Sarah asked, looking up from her statement. "About 150, replied Maria, who had been monitoring the arrivals. Words spread to chapters from 3 states. "People are driving hundreds of miles to be here." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scale of support for someone they barely knew, her. "Why are so many people coming?" "This started with just Marcus," Charles answered, "because what you did represents something important to us. You saw injustice and spoke up, even though it was risky. Most people in straight society avoid us or judge us based on our appearance. You treated Marcus like a human being." Through the window, Sarah watched as news crews interviewed some of the bikers who were willing to speak to reporters. She was surprised by their articulate responses and professional demeanor. These weren't the stereotypical outlaws portrayed in movies. Jake's phone buzzed constantly with updates. "Our lawyer's on his way," he told Sarah. "He's also bringing evidence that proves Marcus was at the charity event when the robbery occurred. Photos, video footage, signed witness statements." "That's great news," Sarah said, feeling hopeful. "So this should all be resolved soon?" Jake's expression grew more serious. "Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The police department doesn't like admitting mistakes, especially high-profile ones. And now, with all the media attention, they're under pressure to maintain their position." Sarah finished writing her statement and read it aloud to Jake and Charles. It was honest and straightforward, describing exactly what she had witnessed without exaggeration or emotional language. "This is good," Jake said after hearing it. "It's factual and credible. Are you ready to give this to the reporters?" Before Sarah could answer, her daughter Lisa burst through the diner door, having navigated through the crowd of bikers and reporters outside. Lisa was a corporate lawyer in her 30s, and her professional instincts were immediately alert to the gravity of the situation. "Mom, what have you gotten yourself into?" Lisa said, looking around at the packed diner with a mixture of concern and amazement. Sarah introduced Lisa to Jake and Charles, explaining what had led to the current situation. Lisa listened carefully, her legal training evident in the questions she asked about Marcus's case and the evidence supporting his alibi. "This is actually a pretty strong case for wrongful arrest," Lisa said after reviewing the information. "But Mom, you need to understand that once you make a public statement, you're potentially inserting yourself into a legal proceeding. What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means you might have to testify if this goes to court. It means you'll be associated with this case in the public record. Some people might not like that you supported a Hells Angel member." Sarah looked around at the bikers who had filled her diner, treating her property with respect and showing genuine appreciation for her support. "These people have shown me more loyalty in one day than some customers I've served for years." Lisa studied her mother's face, recognizing the determined expression she remembered from childhood. "Okay, if you're going to do this, let's do it right. I want to review your statement and be present when you talk to the media." As they worked on refining the statement, word came that Marcus's lawyer had arrived with the evidence proving his innocence. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Reynolds, was well known for defending bikers' rights and had a reputation for thorough preparation. "The evidence is overwhelming," Patricia told the gathered group. "Marcus was photographed at the charity event at the exact time the robbery was occurring 200 miles away. The police either didn't do their homework or they're hoping to pressure him into pleading guilty to avoid a trial. The arrival of concrete evidence proving Marcus's innocence changed the atmosphere in the diner. What had started as a show of support was now becoming a fight for justice against what appeared to be either police incompetence or misconduct. "We're going to hold a press conference," Jake announced. "Patricia will present the evidence, Sarah will read her statement about the arrest, and we'll demand that charges against Marcus be dropped immediately." Sarah felt her heart racing at the thought of speaking publicly, but she knew it was the right thing to do. "When do we do this?" "In 1 hour," Jake replied. "That gives us time to organize everything properly and gives the media time to set up." As the hour approached, more bikers continued to arrive. The parking lot was now completely full, with motorcycles parked along the highway as far as Sarah could see. Local residents had begun gathering at a safe distance. Some supportive and others clearly nervous about the massive gathering. Sheriff Williams, the local law enforcement chief, approached the diner for a face-to-face meeting with Jake. Sarah watched through the window as the two men talked seriously but calmly. With no visible tension or hostility. "What did he want?" Sarah asked when Jake returned. "He wanted to make sure we're not planning any trouble," Jake replied. "I assured him this is strictly peaceful. He actually seems like a decent guy who's caught in the middle of something that started at the state level." Sarah looked around her diner one more time before the press conference. In a single day, her quiet life had been turned upside down, but she felt more alive and purposeful than she had in years. She was about to step in front of cameras and defend her actions to the world, supported by 200 bikers who had made her cause their own. "Are you ready for this?" Lisa asked, straightening her mother's apron. Sarah nodded, clutching her statement. "Roberto always said this place should be somewhere everyone feels welcome. I think he'd be proud of what's happening here today." Within an hour, Sarah's small diner had transformed into something resembling a motorcycle rally. The parking lot, which normally held maybe 20 cars, was now packed with over 100 Harley-Davidson motorcycles arranged in neat rows. The bikers had organized themselves with military precision. Despite the seemingly chaotic arrival of different groups, Sarah moved through the crowded diner, pouring coffee and serving sandwiches to anyone who wanted them. What struck her most was how polite and organized everyone remained. The bikers were careful not to damage anything they cleaned up after themselves. And many insisted on paying for their food, despite Jake's suggestion that it was on the house. "Ma'am, this is the best apple pie I've had in years," said a biker named Tommy, who looked to be in his 60s. "My late wife used to make one similar to this." Sarah smiled, momentarily forgetting the surreal nature of the situation. "Thank you. I used my grandmother's recipe." As she worked, Sarah learned more about the people who had come to support Marcus. Many were veterans, small business owners, mechanics, and even a few retired police officers who had joined the motorcycle club after leaving law enforcement. Their reasons for being there went beyond simple loyalty to a fellow member. "It's about justice," explained Maria, one of the few women in the group. "Marcus volunteers at a veterans shelter every weekend. He's been clean for 8 years and works construction to support his elderly mother. This arrest could destroy everything he's worked to build." Jake approached the counter where Sarah was working. "We need to talk about something important," he said quietly. "The media's starting to show up." Through the window, Sarah could see news vans pulling into the parking lot. Reporters with cameras were setting up outside, but the bikers had formed a respectful perimeter that kept them at a distance without being threatening. "What should I do?" Sarah asked, feeling overwhelmed. "That's up to you," Jake replied. "You can ask us all to leave and we'll respect that. Or you can stand with us while we try to get the truth out about what happened to Marcus." Sarah's phone rang constantly now. Friends, family members, and even strangers who had seen the news were calling to check on her or to express their opinions about the situation. Her daughter Lisa was driving down from the city, worried about her mother's safety. "Mom, what were you thinking?" Lisa had said during their last conversation, "You could get hurt." But looking around at the faces in her diner, Sarah didn't feel threatened. She felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of community and purpose that went beyond just serving food to travelers. A new development changed everything. Jake's phone rang, and after a brief conversation, his expression grew serious. He gathered several of the senior members for a hushed conference near the back of the diner. "What's going on?" Sarah asked when Jake returned to the counter. "We just got word from our lawyer," Jake said. "The police are planning to come back here with a much larger force. They're claiming this gathering is a public safety threat and they want everyone to disperse." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Are they right? Is this dangerous?" Jake looked around at his fellow bikers, many of whom were quietly eating lunch and sharing stories about their families and jobs. "Only if they make it dangerous. We're not here to fight anyone. We're here to support a friend and the woman who stood up for him." Outside, Sarah could see more police cars arriving. Not just local officers this time, but what appeared to be state police and possibly federal agents. The sight of armed law enforcement taking positions around the diner made the situation feel much more serious. "Maybe I should ask everyone to leave," Sarah said, worry creeping into her voice. "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." Before Jake could respond, an older biker named Charles spoke up. Charles wore a patch indicating he was a Vietnam veteran and had the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Sarah," Charles said, 47 years ago, I came home from a war that nobody wanted to talk about. People called us baby killers and spit on us in airports. For years, I felt like the whole world was against us." He paused, looking around at his fellow bikers. "These people here, they became my family when nobody else would accept us. We learned to stand together because nobody else would stand with us." Charles walked closer to Sarah. "What you did today, standing up for Marcus when you didn't have to, that's the same thing we've been doing for each other for decades. You're already one of us, whether you wear our colors or not." The words hit Sarah unexpectedly hard. She thought about her late husband Roberto, who had dreamed of this diner being a place where everyone was welcome. He had believed in treating people with dignity regardless of their appearance or background. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah asked. Jake pulled out a piece of paper. "The media wants a statement. If you're willing to tell your side of what happened during Marcus's arrest, it might help his case. But I want you to understand, once you do that, you're taking a public stand. Some people won't like that." Sarah looked at the paper, then at the faces surrounding her. These weren't the dangerous criminals she had been conditioned to fear. They were people who had found family with each other and were now offering to include her in that family. Through the window, she could see the police presence growing. News helicopters circled overhead, and reporters were broadcasting live from just outside the parking lot. The situation was rapidly becoming something much bigger than a simple arrest. "If I do this," Sarah said slowly, "what happens to my business? What happens to my quiet life?" Jake's expression was honest and direct. "I can't guarantee what happens next, but I can promise you won't face it alone." Sarah thought about Marcus, who had been nothing but respectful during his brief visit. She thought about the officers who had treated him roughly despite his compliance. She thought about her late husband's dream of the diner being a place where everyone was treated fairly. "Get me a pen," she said finally. "If Marcus was innocent and was treated unfairly, then people need to know about it." As Sarah reached for the pen to write her statement, she had no idea that her decision would soon bring over 200 bikers to her diner, turning her small establishment into the epicenter of a standoff that would capture national attention. Sarah stood behind the counter, her phone still clutched in her trembling hand, watching the police cars disappear down the highway. The diner felt eerily quiet after the confrontation, with only the hum of the coffee machine breaking the silence. She replayed the scene in her mind, wondering if she had overreacted or if her instincts about the unfair treatment had been correct. The rumble of motorcycle engines that had been distant moments before was now growing noticeably closer. Sarah walked to the window and peered out, seeing nothing yet, but the sound was unmistakable. Her heart rate, which had just begun to settle, started racing again. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter Lisa. "Mom, are you okay?" Saw on the police scanner app that there was activity at the diner? Sarah quickly typed back that she was fine. Though she wasn't entirely sure that was true, minutes passed and the engine sounds grew louder. Sarah tried to busy herself with cleaning tasks, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows. She had grown up in this small highway town and had heard stories about biker gangs, but had never experienced anything like this firsthand. The first motorcycle appeared on the horizon, followed by another, then several more. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized this wasn't just a few bikers passing through, this was an organized group. The lead bike pulled into her parking lot, followed by 2 more, then 5, then 10. The door chimed as the first biker walked in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years on the road. His leather vest bore the same patches she had seen on Marcus, identifying him as a Hell's Angel, but with additional insignia that suggested a position of authority. "You Sarah?" he asked, his voice deep and serious. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I'm Sarah Martinez. This is my place." The biker extended a calloused hand. "Name's Jake. I'm the chapter president. I understand you helped one of our brothers today." More bikers began filing into the diner, but they were surprisingly orderly, removing their sunglasses and speaking in low tones. Sarah noticed they weren't the chaotic, destructive group she had imagined from movies and television shows. They seemed organized and purposeful. "I just spoke up when I saw someone being treated unfairly," Sarah said, still uncertain about what was happening. "Your friend Marcus seemed like a good man." Jake nodded slowly. "Marcus called me from the police station. He's got one phone call, and he used it to tell us about what you did." He paused, studying her face. "That took courage. Most people would have looked the other way." Sarah glanced around the diner, which was now filled with leather-clad bikers. Despite their intimidating appearance, they were respectful, waiting quietly and not touching anything without permission. One older biker even helped a younger member remove his jacket properly. "Can I get you all some coffee?" Sarah asked, falling back on her hospitality training. "I've got fresh pots brewing." "That would be appreciated," Jake replied. "But first, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to help us get Marcus out of this situation?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "I'm not sure what you mean. I already told the police what I saw." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her a news article that had just been posted online. The headline read, "Armed robbery suspect arrested at local diner." Marcus's photo was prominently displayed, along with details about his alleged crimes. "The problem is," Jake explained, "Marcus was with us at a charity ride 2 states over when this robbery happened. We got photos, witnesses, even video from the event. But the cops arrested him based on a witness description that could fit half the bikers in America, tall guy with tattoos riding a Harley." Sarah read through the article, noting the inconsistencies. The robbery had occurred at 11 p.m. the previous night, but according to Jake, Marcus had been at a children's hospital charity event until midnight, 200 miles away. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because you're the only witness to how they treated him during the arrest. Your video could be important evidence if this goes to trial." Jake's expression grew serious. "But more than that, Marcus said you treated him like a human being when you didn't have to. That means something to us." More bikers continued to arrive, and Sarah could see through the windows that the parking lot was filling with motorcycles. The sight was overwhelming, but she began to notice details that challenged her preconceptions. Many of the bikers were older, some with gray beards and weathered faces that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. A few women were among the group, and several bikers wore patches indicating military service. "How many of you are there?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Word's been spreading through the network," Jake replied. "When one of our brothers gets arrested on false charges, especially when someone stands up for him, we take notice. I'd say we'll have maybe 50, 60 members here within the hour." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was her neighbor calling. "Sarah, are you okay? There are motorcycles everywhere around your place." "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said into the phone. Everything's under control. But as she hung up, she realized she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The diner was now packed with bikers, and more were arriving every minute. The situation was escalating beyond anything she had anticipated. When she simply spoke up for fair treatment, Jake seemed to notice her growing concern. "We're not here to cause trouble," he assured her. "We're here to support someone who supported one of us. But I want you to know what you're getting into. The media's probably going to show up soon. This could get complicated." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. These weren't the violent criminals she had expected. They looked like working people, veterans, fathers and grandfathers who happened to ride motorcycles. But she also understood that their sheer numbers and appearance would likely alarm the local community and authorities. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake smiled for the first time since entering the diner. "Now we wait and we stand together. You showed loyalty to someone you barely knew. We don't forget that kind of thing." Outside, the rumble of engines continued as more motorcycles arrived, and Sarah realized that her simple act of defending a stranger was about to transform her quiet diner into something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter at Rosie's diner for the third time that morning, her mind wandering to the stack of unpaid bills hidden beneath the cash register. The small roadside restaurant had been her late husband's dream, and she was determined to keep it running despite the mounting financial pressures. The morning rush had been slower than usual, with only a handful of truckers and local workers stopping by for coffee and breakfast. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a large man in leather vest and jeans walking in. His arms were covered in tattoos, and the patch on his back clearly identified him as a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Sarah had seen his type before. The highway attracted all kinds of travelers, and she treated everyone with the same respect and courtesy. "Morning," she said with a genuine smile. "Coffee to start?" The biker nodded and took a seat at the counter. "Black coffee and whatever breakfast special you got," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. Sarah poured the coffee and noticed his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the cup. "You okay, hon?" she asked, her maternal instincts kicking in. The man looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "I just had a long ride," he replied. "Name's Marcus. This is good coffee." Sarah introduced herself and went to prepare his breakfast. Marcus seemed different from what she expected. He was polite, saying please and thank you, and even complimented the cleanliness of the diner. When she served his eggs and bacon, he ate quietly, occasionally glancing out the window where his motorcycle was parked. 20 minutes later, as Marcus was finishing his meal, 3 police cars pulled into the parking lot with their lights flashing. Sarah watched through the window as 6 officers got out, their hands resting on their weapons. Her heart began to race as they approached the diner entrance. The officers burst through the door without knocking, their eyes immediately focusing on Marcus. "You need to come with us," the lead officer announced. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Marcus slowly put down his coffee cup and raised his hands. "What's the charge, officer?" "Armed robbery from last night. 3 witnesses identified you and your bike." Sarah watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Something didn't feel right about the situation. Marcus had been nothing but respectful during his visit, and his demeanor didn't match that of someone who had recently committed a violent crime. "I was 2 states over last night," Marcus said calmly. "I got receipts and witnesses." The lead officer, whose badge read Sergeant Mitchell, wasn't interested in hearing explanations. "Tell it to the judge. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." As the officers moved to handcuff Marcus, Sarah noticed something that made her blood boil. One of the officers was roughly handling Marcus, pressing his face against the counter unnecessarily hard. Another officer was going through Marcus's wallet without permission, laughing at his driver's license photo. "Is all this really necessary?" Sarah found herself saying. The officers turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. "Ma'am, please step back." "This doesn't concern you," Sergeant Mitchell said dismissively, but Sarah had seen enough. Injustice in her 52 years to recognize it when it was happening right in front of her. "He's been nothing but polite since he walked in here." You don't need to treat him like an animal." The tension in the room increased immediately. The officers seemed annoyed that a civilian was questioning their methods. Marcus looked at Sarah, with surprise and gratitude, but also concern for her safety. "Lady, you don't know who you're defending," one of the younger officers sneered. "This guy's probably got a rap sheet longer than your arm." Sarah's protective instincts flared. "I don't care what he might have done in the past. Right now, he's been respectful and peaceful in my establishment, and you're treating him worse than you'd treat a dog." Sergeant Mitchell's face reddened with anger. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and mind your own business." "This is my business," Sarah shot back, her voice gaining strength. "This is my diner, and I won't stand by and watch you abuse someone who hasn't shown any aggression." The standoff continued as the officers finished handcuffing Marcus. Sarah could see the fear in the young officer's eyes as he realized their aggressive tactics were being witnessed and criticized by a civilian. Sergeant Mitchell seemed torn between asserting his authority and avoiding a potential complaint. As they prepared to lead Marcus away, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this arrest for my own records," she announced, "just in case there are any questions later about how this was handled." The officers froze. In an age of social media and viral videos, they knew that their actions could quickly become public knowledge. Sergeant Mitchell's jaw tightened as he tried to decide how to respond to this unexpected challenge. "Turn that phone off right now," he demanded. "I have every right to record in my own establishment," Sarah replied. Standing her ground despite her racing heart, Marcus looked back at her as they led him toward the door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Sarah nodded, still recording. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." As the police cars pulled away, Sarah realized her hands were shaking. She had never confronted law enforcement before, and the adrenaline was still coursing through her system. She looked down at her phone, the video still recording, and wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. Outside, she could hear the rumble of motorcycle engines in the distance, growing louder by the minute. Word traveled fast in the biker community, and news of Marcus's arrest was already spreading. Sarah had no idea that her simple act of human decency was about to trigger a chain of events that would transform her quiet diner into the center of a confrontation that would make headlines across the country. The sound of engines grew closer, and Sarah realized that her decision to defend a stranger was about to bring consequences she never could have imagined.